Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. I'm David Sneathen and I'm going to tell you a story. I just got a notification and it's me. Yay! Oops, I can't do that. Stay on this page. Da, 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 da. All right, Kimmy, are you sharing links? All right, perfect. All right, so today is I just got, you don't have to share it with me, I've already got it. All right. So today is the 17th. This is Jesus' prayer that he said in the Garden of Gethsemane. So we're going to go ahead and read that. John chapter 17. When Jesus had spoken these words, he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you, since you have given him authority over all flesh to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. I glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. And now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed. I have manifested your name to the people whom you gave me out of the world. Yours they were, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything that you have given me is from you, for I have given them the words that you gave me, and they have received them and have come to know in truth that I came from you, and they have believed that you sent me. I am praying for them. I am not praying for the world, but for those whom you have sent, whom you have given me, for they are yours. All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I am glorified in them. And I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, keep them in your name, which you have given me, that they may be one, even as we are one. While I was with them, I kept them in your name, which you have given me. I have guarded them, and not one of them has been lost except the son of destruction, that the scripture might be fulfilled. But now I am coming to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in themselves. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sake I consecrate myself, that they also may be sanctified in truth. I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one even as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and loved them even as you loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, even though the world does not know you, I know you, and these know that you have sent me. I made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. All right, so that is John chapter 17. So at this time, JJ is about to introduce something.
It's time for Kim's synopsis.
We're all waiting for Kimberly.
Laying down on her floor. Okay, guys. Can I touch you over here?
No.
So in the last chapter,
basically, they got the lion skin off of Puzzle, and then they started fighting each other, and the people, the Toshban people, they were trying to get all the Narnians into the stable, and so they got most or all of the dwarves in the stable. They got Eustace, they got Jill, and they got at toward the end of the last chapter that we read, they also got wait, I remembered it till now. They also got King, I forget. Yeah, I knew it starts with a T. Okay, so they got King Tyrion into the stable, and Tyrion, he also managed to get the general of the people, the Toshbans, in there with him. He basically, yeah, Rishta. He basically grabbed him and jumped in. And Tosh, he basically like did something weird, and yeah. And I'm pretty sure Rishta's kind of dead. And then everybody except for Lucy, or maybe Susan. I think it was Lucy for some reason. But everyone except for Lucy was there, and that means Peter, Diggory, Polly, Eustace, Jill, and Susan and Edmund. Yeah. And they had a conversation with Tyrion, and I think they're gonna look at something now in the stable. And I'm pretty sure Aslan, the real Aslan, is gonna make an appearance. And that's true.
At this time, we have a bonus segment. Go ahead. You made me do this. Now I feel weird because nothing's happening.
Now I feel weird.
For Narnia, right?
Or
You have to
Narnia.
hold up your sword, your shield. No, hold it up so they can see it. There you go.
I'm a dwarf.
You're a dwarf. He's got his Thor helmet and his shield. Is that the shield we got in France?
This is the lion.
Yeah, but is it the shield we got in France? I don't know.
No, it isn't.
It's not? Okay.
This is the lion.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty authentic Narnian right there, the shield. I'm sorry, you're talking to me, but I can't actually hear what you're saying. Okay, so at this time we're gonna settle down, or I'm not gonna read. I have an extra day, so I don't have to read tonight. Rebecca said it was cute. Yeah, Rebecca says it was from France too. I'm pretty sure it was from France. Oh, Daniel's going to show you his artillery that he built today. That is pretty cool. JJ. Okay. Daniel, did you take your meds?
Yeah.
What? Can you speak normal? Okay. All right. Rebecca likes the tank. All right, we're going to try this. Let's see how far into chapter 13 we get. All right, how the dwarves refused to be taken in. Tyrion had thought, or he would have thought if he had time to think at all, that they were inside a little thatched stable about 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. In reality, they stood on grass. The deep blue sky was overhead, and the air which blew gently on their faces was that of a day in early summer. Did I read this already? No, this is not it. Okay. All right, sorry. Not far away from them rose a grove of trees, thickly leaved, but under every leaf there peeped out the gold or faint yellow or purple or glowing red of fruits, such as no one has seen in our world. The fruit made Tyrion feel that it must be autumn, but there was something in the air, the feel of the air, that told him it could not be later than June. They all moved toward the trees. Everyone raised his hand to pick the fruit he best liked the look of, and then everyone paused for a second. This fruit was so beautiful that each felt, it can't be meant for me. Surely we're not allowed to pluck it. It's all right, said Peter. I know what we're all thinking, but I'm sure, quite sure we needn't. I've a feeling we've got to the country where everything is allowed. Here goes then, said Eustace, and they all began to eat. What was the fruit like? Unfortunately, no one can describe a taste. All I can say is that compared with those fruits, the freshest grapefruit you've ever eaten was dull, and the juiciest orange was dry, and the most melting pear was hard and woody, and the sweetest wild strawberry was sour, and there were no seeds or stones or no wasps. If you had once eaten that fruit, all the nicest things in this world would taste like medicines after it. But I can't describe it. You can't find out what it is like unless you get to that country and taste it for yourself. When they had eaten enough, Eustace said to King Peter, You haven't yet told us how you got here. You were just going to when King Tyrion turned up. There's not much to tell, said Peter. Edmund and I were standing on the platform and we saw your train coming in. I remember thinking it was taking the bend far too fast, and I remember thinking how funny it was that our people were probably in the same train, though Lucy didn't know about it. Your people, High King? Said Tyrion. I mean, my father and mother, Edmund's and Lucy's and mine. Why were they? Asked Jill. You don't mean to say they know about Narnia? Oh, no, it had nothing to do with Narnia. They were on their way to Bristol. I only heard they were going that morning, but Edmund said they'd be bound to be going by that train. Edmund was the sort of person who knows about railways. And what happened then? Asked Jill. Well, it's not very easy to describe, is it, Edmund? Said the High King. Not very, said Edmund. It wasn't at all like that other time when we were pulled out of our own world by magic. There was a frightful roar and something hit me with a bang, but it didn't hurt, and I felt not so much scared as, well, excited. Oh, and this is one queer thing. I'd had a rather sore knee from a hack at Rugger. I noticed it had suddenly gone, and I felt very light. And then here we are. It was much the same for us in the railway carriage, said Lord Diggory, wiping the last traces of the fruit from his golden beard. Only I think you and I, Polly, chiefly felt that we'd been unstiffened. You youngsters won't understand, but we stopped feeling old. Youngsters indeed, said Jill. I don't believe you two really are much older than we are here. Well, if we aren't, we have been, said the Lady Polly. And what has been happening since you got here? Asked Eustace. Well, said Peter, for a long time, at least I suppose it was a long time, nothing happened. Then the door opened. The door? Said Tyrion. Yes, said Peter, the door you came in, or came out by. Have you forgotten? But where is it? Look, said Peter, and pointed. Tyrion looked and saw the queerest and most ridiculous thing you can imagine. Only a few yards away, clear to be seen in the sunlight, there stood up a rough wooden door, and round it the framework of the doorway. Nothing else, no walls, no roof. He walked toward it, bewildered, and the others followed, watching to see what he would do. He walked round to the other side of the door, but it looked just the same from the other side. He was still in the open air on the summer morning. The door was simply standing up by itself, as if it had grown there like a tree. "Fair sir," said Tyrion to the High King, "this is a great marvel." "It is the door you came through with that Calormene 5 minutes ago," said Peter, smiling. "But did I not come in out of the wood into the stable, whereas this seems to be a door leading from nowhere to nowhere?" "It looks like that if you walk round it," said Peter, "but put your eye to the place where there is a crack between two of the planks, and look through it." Tyrion put his eye to the hole. At first he could see nothing but blackness. Then, as his eyes grew used to it, he saw the dull red glow of a bonfire that was nearly going out, and above that, in a black sky, stars. Then he could see dark figures moving about or standing between him and the fire. He could hear them talking, and their voices were like those of Calormene's. So he knew that he was looking out through the stable door into the dark lantern waste where he had fought his last battle. The men were discussing whether to go in and look for Rishta Tarkan, but none of them wanted to do that or to set fire to the stable. Here's a picture of the door that is in the middle of nowhere, and King Tyrion is looking through it, trying to see what's going on. He looked round again and could hardly believe his eyes. There was the blue sky overhead and grassy country spreading as far as he could see in every direction, and his new friends all around him laughing. "It seems then," said Tyrion, smiling himself, "that the stable seen from within and the stable seen from without are two different places." "Yes," said the Lord Diggory, "its inside is bigger than its outside." "Yes," said Queen Lucy, "in our world too a stable once had something inside it that was bigger than our whole world." It was the first time she had spoken, and from the thrill in her voice Tyrion now knew why. She was drinking everything in, even more deeply than the others. She had been too happy to speak. He wanted to hear her speak again, so he said, "Of your courtesy, madam, tell on, tell me of your whole adventure." "After the shock and the noise," said Lucy, "we found ourselves here, and we wondered at the door as you did. Then the door opened for the first time. We saw darkness through the doorway when it did, and there came through a big man with a naked sword. We saw by his arms that he was a Calormene. He took his stand beside the door with his sword raised, resting on his shoulder, ready to cut down anyone who came through. We went to him and spoke to him, but we thought he could neither see us nor hear us, and he never looked around on the sky and the sunlight and the grass. I think he couldn't see them either. So then we waited a long time. Then we heard the bolt being drawn on the other side of the door, but the man didn't get ready to strike with his sword till he could see who was coming in. So we supposed he had been told to strike some and spare others. But at the very moment when the door opened, all of a sudden Tush was there. On this side of the door, none of us saw where he came from, and through the door there came a big cat. It gave one look at Tush and ran for its life just in time, for he pounced at it, and the door hit his beak as it was shut. The man could see Tush. He turned very pale and bowed down before the monster, but it vanished away. Then we waited a long time again. At last the door opened for the third time, and there came in a young Calormene. I liked him. The sentinel at the door started and looked very surprised when he saw him. I think he'd been expecting someone quite different. "I see it all now," said Eustace. He had the bad habit of interrupting stories. "The cat was go in first, and the sentry had orders to do him no harm. Then the cat was to come out and say he'd seen their beastly Tashlan and pretend to be frightened to scare the other animals. But what Shift never guessed was that the real Tash would turn up, so Ginger came out really frightened. And after that, Shift could send in anyone he wanted to get rid of, and the sentry would kill them. And, friend, said Tyrion softly, you hinder the lady in her tale. Well, said Lucy. The sentry was surprised. That gave the other man just time to get on guard. They had a fight. He killed the sentry and flung him outside the door. Then he came walking slowly forward to where we were. He could see us and everything else. We tried to talk to him, but he was rather like a man in a trance. He kept on saying, Tash, Tash, where is Tash? I go to Tash. So we gave it up, and he went away somewhere. Over there, I liked him, and after that, ugh. Lucy made a face. After that, said Edmund, someone flung a monkey through the door, and Tash was there again. My sister is so tender-hearted, she doesn't like to tell you that Tash made one peck, and the monkey was gone. Serve him right, said Eustace. All the same, I hope he'll disagree with Tash too. And after that, said Edmund, came about a dozen dwarfs, and then Jill and Eustace, and last of all yourself. I hope Tash ate the dwarfs too, said Eustace. Little swine. No, he didn't, said Lucy. And don't be horrid, they're still here. In fact, you can see them from here, and I've tried and tried to make friends with them, but it's no use. Friends with them? Cried Eustace. If you know how those dwarfs have been behaving. Oh, stop it, Eustace, said Lucy. Do come and see them. King Tyrion, perhaps you could do something with them. I can feel no great love for dwarfs today, said Tyrion. Yet at your asking, lady, I would do a greater thing than this. Lucy led the way, and soon they could all see the dwarfs. They had a very odd look. They weren't strolling about or enjoying themselves, although the cords with which they had been tied seemed to have vanished. Nor were they lying down and having a rest. They were sitting very close together in a little circle facing one another. They never looked round or took any notice of the humans till Lucy and Tyrion were almost near enough to touch them. Then the dwarves all cocked their heads as if they couldn't see anyone, but were listening hard and trying to guess by the sound what was happening. Hello? Okay. Look out, said one of them in a surly voice. Mind where you're going. Don't walk into our faces. All right, said Eustace indignantly. We're not blind. We've got eyes in our heads. They must be darn good ones if you can see and hear, said the same dwarf, whose name was Diggle. In where? Asked Edmund. Why, you bonehead, in here, of course, said Diggle, in this pitch-black, poky, smelly little hole of a stable. Are you blind? Said Tyrion. Ain't we all blind in the dark? Said Diggle. But it isn't dark, you poor stupid dwarfs, said Lucy. Can't you see? Look up, look around. Can't you see the sky and the trees and the flowers? Can't you see me? How in the name of all humbug can we see what ain't there? And how can I see you any more than you can see me in this pitch blackness? But I can see you, said Lucy. I'll prove I can see you. You've got a pipe in your mouth. Anyone that knows the smell of baccy could tell that, said Diggle. Oh, the poor things. This is dreadful, said Lucy. Then she had an idea. She stooped and picked some wild violets. Listen, dwarf, she said, even if your eyes are wrong, perhaps your nose is all right. Can you smell that? She leaned across and held the fresh, damp flowers to Diggle's ugly nose, but she had to jump back quickly in order to avoid a blow from his hard little fist. None of that, he shouted. How dare you? What do you mean by shoving a lot of filthy stable litter in my face? There was a thistle in it, too. It's like your sauce. And who are you, anyway? Earthman, said Tyrion. She is the Queen Lucy, sent hither by Aslan out of the deep past. and it is for her sake that I alone, Tyrion, your lawful king, do not cut all your heads from your shoulders, proved and twice proved traitors that you are." "Well, if it doesn't beat everything," exclaimed Diggle, "how can you go on talking all that rot? Your wonderful lion didn't come and help you, did he? Thought not. And now, even now, when you've been beaten and shoved into this black hole just the same as the rest of us, you're still at your old game, starting a new lie, trying to make us believe we're none of us shut up and it ain't dark and heaven knows what." "There is no black hole, save in your own fancy, fool," cried Tyrion. "Come out of it." And leaning forward, he caught Diggle by the belt and the hood and swung him right out of the circle of dwarves. But the moment Tyrion put him down, Diggle darted back to his place among the others, rubbing his nose and howling. "Ow! Ow! What'd you do that for? Banging my face against the wall. You've nearly broken my nose." "Oh dear," said Lucy. "What are we going to do for them?" "Let 'em alone," said Eustace, but as he spoke the earth trembled. The sweet air grew suddenly sweeter. A brightness flashed behind them. All turned. Tyrion turned last because he was afraid. There stood his heart's desire, huge and real, the golden lion Aslan himself, and already the others were kneeling in a circle round his forepaws and burying their hands and faces in his mane as he stooped his great head to touch them with his tongue. Then he fixed his eyes upon Tyrion, and Tyrion came near, trembling, and flung himself at the lion's feet. And the lion kissed him and said, "Well done, last of the kings of Narnia, who stood firm at the darkest hour." "Aslan," said Lucy through her tears, will you do something for these poor dwarves?" "Dearest," said Aslan, "I will show you both what I can and what I cannot do." He came close to the dwarves and gave a low growl, low, but it set all the air shaking. But the dwarves said to one another, "Hear that? That's the gang at the other end of the stable trying to frighten us. They do it with a machine of some kind. Don't take any notice. It won't take us again." Aslan raised his head and shook his mane. Instantly a glorious feast appeared on the dwarves' knees. Pies and tongues and pigeons and trifles and ices, and each of the dwarves had a goblet of good wine in his right hand. But it wasn't much use. They began eating and drinking greedily enough, but it was clear that they couldn't taste it properly. They thought they were eating and drinking only the sort of things you might find in a stable. One said he was trying to eat hay, and another said he had got a bit of an old turnip, and a third said he found a raw cabbage leaf. And they raised golden goblets of rich red wine to their lips and said, "Ugh, fancy drinking dirty water out of a trough that's a donkey's been at. Never thought we'd come to this." But very soon every dwarf began suspecting that every other dwarf had found something nicer than he had, and they started grabbing and snatching and went on to quarreling, till in a few minutes there was a free fight, and all the good food was smeared on their faces and clothes and trodden underfoot. But when at last they sat down to nurse their black eyes and their bleeding noses, they all said, "Well, at any rate, there's no humbug here. We haven't let anyone take us in. The dwarves are for the dwarves." "You see," said Aslan, "they will not let us help them. They have chosen cunning instead of belief. Their prison is only in their own minds. Yet they are in that prison and so afraid of being taken in that they cannot be taken out." Here's the picture of the dwarfs. The dwarfs are for the dwarfs. You see? Do they remind you of anybody in the real world? They sure do for me. But come, children, I have other work to do. He went to the door, and they all followed him. He raised his head and roared, "Now is the time!" Then louder, "Time!" then so loud it could have shaken the stars. Time! Sorry, my voice is really giving out. The door flew open. Chapter 14, Night Falls on Narnia. They all stood beside Aslan on his right side and looked through the open doorway. The bonfire had gone out. On the earth all was blackness. In fact, you could not have told that you were looking into a wood if you had not seen where the dark shapes of the trees ended and the stars began. But when Aslan had roared yet again, out on the left they saw another black shape. That is, they saw another patch where there were no stars. And the patch rose up higher and became the shape of a man, the hugest of all giants. They all knew Narnia well enough to work out where he must be standing. He must be on the high moorlands that stretch away to the north beyond the river Shribble. Then Jill and Eustace remembered how once long ago in the deep caves beneath those moors they had seen a great giant asleep and been told that his name was Father Time, and that he would wake on the day the world ended. Yes, said Aslan, though they had not spoken. While he lay dreaming, his name was Time. Now that he has awakened, he will have a new name. Then the great giant raised a horn to his mouth. They could see this by the change of the black shape he made against the stars. After that, quite a bit later, because sound travels so slowly, they heard the sound of the horn, high and terrible, yet of a strange, deadly beauty. Immediately, the sky became full of shooting stars. Even one shooting star is a fine thing to see, but these were dozens, and then scores, and then hundreds, till it was like a silver rain, and it went on, and when it had gone on for some while, one or two of them began to think that there was another dark shape against the sky as well as the giants. It was in a different place, right overhead, up in the very roof of the sky, as you might call it. Perhaps it is a cloud, thought Edmund. At any rate, there were no stars there, just blackness. But all around, the downpour of stars went on, and then the starless patch began to grow, spreading further and further out from the center of the sky, and presently a quarter of the whole sky was black, and then a half, and at last the rain of shooting stars was going on, only low down near the horizon. With a thrill of wonder, and there was some terror in it too, they all suddenly realized what was happening. The spreading blackness was not a cloud at all. It was simply emptiness. The black part of the sky was the part in which there were no stars left. All the stars were falling. Aslan had called them home. The last few seconds before the rain of stars had quite ended were very exciting. Stars began falling all around them. But stars in that world are not the great flaming globes they are in ours. They are people. Edmund and Lucy had once met one. So now they found showers of glittering people, all with long hair like burning silver and spears like white-hot metal rushing down to them out of the black air, swifter than falling stones. They made a hissing noise as they landed and burnt the grass, and all these stars glided past them and stood somewhere behind, a little to the right. This was a great advantage, because otherwise, now that there were no stars in the sky, everything would have been completely dark, and you could have seen nothing. As it was, the crowd of stars behind them cast a fierce white light over their shoulders. They could see mile upon mile of Narnian wood spread out before them, looking as if it were a floodlit. Every bush and almost every blade of grass had its black shadow behind it. The edge of every leaf stood out so sharp that you'd think you could cut your finger on it. On the grass before them lay their own shadows. The great thing was Aslan's shadow. It streamed away to their left, enormous and very terrible. And all this was under a sky that would now be starless forever. The light from behind them and a little to their right was so strong that it lit up even the slopes of the northern moors. Something was moving there. Enormous animals were crawling and sliding down into Narnia. Great dragons and giant lizards and featherless birds with wings like bats' wings. They disappeared into the wood, and for a few minutes there was a silence. Then there came, at first from very far off, sounds of wailing, and then from every direction a rustling and a pattering and a sound of wings. It came nearer and nearer. Soon one could distinguish the scamper of little feet from the padding of big paws, and the clack-clack of light little hoofs from the thunder of great ones. And then one could see thousands of pairs of eyes gleaming. And at last, out of the shadow of the trees, racing up the hill for dear life, by thousands and by millions came all kinds of creatures, talking beasts, dwarfs, satyrs, fauns, giants, calormenes, men from Archenland, monopods, and strange unearthly things from the remote islands or the unknown western lands. And all these ran up to the doorway where Aslan stood. This part of the adventure was the only one which seemed rather like a dream at the time and rather hard to remember properly afterward. Especially, one couldn't say how long it had taken. Sometimes it seemed to have lasted only a few minutes, but at others it felt as if it might have gone on for years. Obviously, unless either the door had grown very much larger or the creatures had suddenly grown as small as gnats, a crowd like that couldn't ever have tried to get through it. But no one thought about that sort of thing at the time. The creatures came rushing on, their eyes brighter and brighter as they drew nearer and nearer to the standing stars. But as they came right up to Aslan, one or the other of two things happened to each of them. They all looked straight in his face. I don't think they had any choice about that. And when some looked, the expression of their faces changed terribly. It was fear and hatred, except that on the faces of talking beasts the fear and hatred lasted only for a fraction of a second. You could see that they suddenly ceased to be talking beasts. They were just ordinary animals. And all the creatures who looked at Aslan in that way swerved to their right, his left, and disappeared into his huge black shadow, which, as you have heard, streamed away to the left of the doorway. The children never saw them again. I don't know what became of them, but the others looked in the face of Aslan and loved him, though some of them were very frightened at the same time, and all these came in at the door, and in on Aslan's right. There were some queer specimens among them. Eustace even recognized one of those very dwarfs who had helped to shoot the horses, but he had no time to wonder about that sort of thing, and anyway, it was no business of his, for a great joy put everything else out of his head. Among the happy creatures who now came crowding round Tirian and his friends were all those whom they had thought dead. There was Runewit the centaur, and Jewel the unicorn, and the good bear, and the good boar, and the good bear, and Farsight the eagle, and the dear dogs, and the horses, and Poggin the dwarf. Further up and higher up, cried Runewit, and thundered away in a gallop to the west. And though they did not understand him, the words somehow set him tingling all over. The boar grunted at them cheerfully. The bear was just going to mutter that he still didn't understand when he caught sight of the fruit trees behind him. He waddled to those trees as fast as he could, and there, no doubt, found something he understood very well. But the dogs remained wagging their tails, and Poggin remained shaking hands with everyone and grinning all over his honest face. I'm going to show you the picture now. There they are going through the door. And Jewel leaned his snowy white head over the king's shoulder, and the king whispered in Jewel's ear. Then everyone turned his attention again to what could be seen through the doorway. The dragons and giant lizards now had Narnia to themselves. They went to and fro, tearing up the trees by the roots and crunching them up as if they were sticks of rhubarb. Minute by minute, the forests disappeared. The whole country became bare, and you could see all sorts of things about its shape, all the little humps and hollows which you had never noticed before. The grass died. Soon Tirian found that he was looking at a world of bare rock and earth. You could hardly believe that anything had ever lived there. The monsters themselves grew old and lay down and died. Their flesh shriveled up and the bones appeared. Soon they were only huge skeletons that lay here and there on the dead rock, looking as if they had died thousands of years ago. For a long time, everything was still. At last, something white, a long, level line of whiteness that gleamed in the light of the standing stars, came moving toward them from the eastern end of the world. A widespread noise broke the silence, first a murmur, then a rumble, then a roar, and now they could see what it was that was coming and how fast it came. It was a foaming wall of water. The sea was rising. In that treeless world, you could see it very well. You could see all the rivers getting wider and the lakes getting larger and separate lakes joining into one and valleys turning into new lakes and hills turning into islands and then those islands vanishing and the high moors to their left and the higher mountains to their right crumbled and slipped down with a roar and a splash into the mounting water. And the water came swirling up to the very threshold of the doorway, but it never passed, so that the foam splashed about Aslan's 4 feet, and now was level water from where they stood to where the waters met the sky. I'll show you this picture, then we'll keep going. And out there it began to grow light. A streak of dreary and disastrous dawn spread along the horizon and widened and grew brighter, till in the end they hardly noticed the light of the stars who stood behind them. At last the sun came up. When it did, the Lord Diggory and the Lady Polly looked at one another and gave a little nod. Those two in a different world had once seen a dying sun, and so they knew at once that this sun also was dying. It was 3 times, 20 times as big as it ought to be, and very dark red. As its rays fell upon the great time giant, he turned red too, and in the reflection of that sun, the whole waste of shoreless waters looked like blood. Then the moon came up quite in her wrong position, very close to the sun, and she also looked red. And at the sight of her, the sun began shooting out great flames like whiskers or snakes of crimson fire toward her. It is as if he were an octopus trying to draw her to himself in his tentacles, and perhaps he did draw her. At any rate, she came to him, slowly at first, but then more and more quickly, till at last his long flames licked round her, and the two ran together and became one huge ball like a burning coal. Great lumps of fire came dropping out of it into the sea, and clouds of steam rose up. Then Aslan said, "Now make an end." The giant threw his horn into the sea. Then he stretched out one arm, very black it looked, and thousands of miles long, across the sky till his hand reached the sun. He took the sun and squeezed it in his hand as you would squeeze an orange, and instantly there was total darkness. Everyone except Aslan jumped back from the ice-cold air which now blew through the doorway. Its edges were already covered with icicles. "Peter, High King of Narnia," said Aslan, "shut the door." Peter, shivering with cold, leaned out into the darkness and pulled the door to. It scraped over ice as he pulled it. Then rather clumsily, for even in that moment his hands had gone numb and blue, he took out a golden key and locked it. They had seen strange things enough through that doorway, but it was stranger than any of them to look round and find themselves in warm daylight, the blue sky above them, flowers at their feet, and laughter in Aslan's eyes. He turned swiftly round, crouched lower, lashed himself with his tail, and shot away like a golden arrow. "Come further in, come further up," he shouted over his shoulder, but who could keep up with him at that pace? They set out walking westward to follow him. "So," said Peter, "night falls on Narnia. What, Lucy, you're not crying? With Aslan ahead and all of us here? Don't try to, don't, sorry, you're not crying." Sorry, because he is crying. "Don't try to stop me, Peter," said Lucy. "I am sure Aslan would not. I am sure it is not wrong to mourn for Narnia. Think of all that lies dead and frozen behind that door." "Yes, and I did hope," said Jill, "that it might go on forever. I knew our world couldn't. I did think Narnia might." "I saw it begin," said the Lord Diggory. "I did not think I would live to see it die." "Sirs," said Tirian, "the ladies do not do well to weep. See, I do so myself. I have seen my mother's death. What world but Narnia have I ever known? It were no virtue, but great discourtesy if we did not mourn." They walked away from the door and away from the dwarfs, who still sat crowded together in their imaginary stable, and as they went they talked to one another about old wars and old peace and ancient kings and all the glories of Narnia. The dogs were still with them. They joined in the conversation, but not very much, because they were too busy racing on ahead and racing back and rushing off to sniff at smells in the grass till they made themselves sneeze. Suddenly they picked up a scent which seemed to excite them very much. They all started arguing about it. "Yes, it is." "No, it isn't." "That's just what I said. Anyone can smell what that is. Take your great nose out of the way and let someone else smell." "What is it, cousins?" said Peter. "A calamine, sire," said several dogs at once. "Lead on to him, then," said Peter. "Whether he meets us in peace or war, he shall be welcome." The dogs darted on ahead and came back a moment later, running as if their lives depended on it, and barking loudly to say that it really was a calamine. Talking dogs, just like the common ones, behave as if they had thought whatever they are doing at the moment immensely important. The others followed where the dogs led them and found a young calamine sitting under a chestnut tree beside a clear stream of water. It was Emmet. He rose at once and bowed gravely. "Sir," he said to Peter, "I know not whether you are my friend or foe, but I should count it my honor to have you for either. Has not one of the poets said that a noble friend is the best gift and a noble enemy the next best?" "Sir," said Peter, "I do not know that there need be any war between you and us." "Do tell who you are and what's happened to you," said Jill. "If there's going to be a story, let all have drink and sit down," barked the dogs. "We're quite blown." "Well, of course, you will be if you keep tearing about the place as you've done," said Eustace. "Sorry, I haven't done any voices lately, except for Aslan's." So the humans sat down on the grass, and when the dogs had all had their very noisy drink out of the stream, they all sat down, bolt upright, panting, with their tongues hanging out of their heads, a little on one side to hear the story. But Jewel remained standing still, polishing his horn against his side. Chapter 15 is called Further Up and Further In. The first word is no, but not no like a negative. No, like you know something. No, K-N-O. Yes, very good. You know how to spell. And the last chapter is going to be called Farewell to Shadowlands. And so we will read both of those tomorrow night. And I hope you enjoyed the story. I think Kimberly looks like she has something to say to us. No, she doesn't, she says. All right. So, like I said, we will talk about the schedule. I'm not 100% sure yet because I think that I might try to do a different kind of sleep schedule since I have to be at work at midnight tomorrow night. So, here's JJ with his sword and shield again. I hope that you enjoyed our story. There's
Not to sleep.
all right, but you need to go to sleep.
I'm bored.
All right. So, I forgot what I was saying, but thank you so much for joining us for Heavy D Storytelling, and we will be back tomorrow night at the same time or a different time. We'll make that determination. All right. God bless you. Have a good night. We love you. Bye.
Bye.